You ever notice how video game adaptations used to be kind of a disaster? Like, for years, it felt like every time a game got turned into a show or a movie, something just didn't click. But lately, something changed. Now, we're getting full anime series based on video games, and some of them are actually really good. So I went through Netflix and picked out 10 video game adaptations that made the jump into anime, some you've probably seen, and a few that might surprise you. Let's start with one that quietly built a whole fantasy world out of a multiplayer game. At number 10, we've got Dota Dragon's Blood. And what's interesting about this one is how far it goes from the actual game. If you've played Dota 2, you know it doesn't really have a traditional story. It's more about characters, abilities, and matches. But the anime takes those characters and builds an entire narrative around them. It follows Davion, a dragon knight who ends up sharing his body with a dragon, which already sets the tone for something much darker than you'd expect. From there, it slowly expands into a bigger conflict involving magic, politics, and ancient forces that feel way beyond just one character's journey. What makes it work is that it doesn't rely on you knowing the game. It treats the world seriously, like a full fantasy series, and just uses the game as its foundation instead of trying to copy it directly. So even if you've never touched Dota, this still feels like a complete story on its own, which is exactly what a good adaptation should do. At number 9, we've got Tekken Bloodline, and this one feels a lot closer to the games compared to most adaptations. Instead of trying to reinvent everything, it goes straight to the core of what Tekken is known for, the Mishima family drama. You follow Jin Kazama, his training under Heihachi, and the events leading up to the King of Iron Fist tournament. If you've played Tekken 3, a lot of this will feel familiar, but the anime adds just enough context to make the story flow better as an actual narrative instead of just cutscenes between fights. And that's really where it works best. It doesn't overcomplicate things. It keeps the focus on the rivalries, the training, and the tournament itself, while giving Jin a bit more emotional depth than the games usually do. It's not trying to be something completely different. It's just taking what already worked in Tekken and presenting it in a more structured, story-driven way. At number 8, we've got Dragon's Dogma, and this one takes a much darker, more psychological route compared to most game adaptations. If you've played the original game, you already know the setup. A dragon shows up, takes your heart, and you become what's called the Arisen. The anime keeps that exact premise, but instead of focusing on exploration and quests like the game, it turns the story into something more personal, and, honestly, a lot more brutal. Each episode is built around a different theme, tied loosely to the 7 deadly sins, and you slowly watch the main character change as he moves forward on his journey. It's less about the world, and more about what that world does to him, and that's where it separates itself from the game. The game gives you freedom, choices, paths, different outcomes. The anime strips all of that away and tells a very direct, almost tragic story. It's not the easiest watch, and it's definitely not for everyone, but it's one of the few adaptations that actually tries something different instead of just retelling the game. At number 7, we've got the Cuphead Show. And honestly, this is one of my personal favorites on this list. If you've played Cuphead, you already know how much of its identity comes from that old school 1930s cartoon style, and the show absolutely leans into that. It doesn't try to modernize it or change it, it just fully commits to the same chaotic rubber hose animation vibe. But what's interesting is that instead of focusing on the difficulty or the boss fights like the game, the show turns it into these short, almost classic cartoon episodes. Cuphead and Mugman get themselves into trouble, usually because of something stupid, and then everything just spirals out of control. It feels a lot like watching those old cartoons. But with the Cuphead world and characters, especially with the devil, who's just as entertaining here as he is in the game. It's simple, it's fun, and it knows exactly what it's trying to be, which is probably why it works so well. At number 6, we've got Pokémon Concierge, and this one is probably the most unexpected entry on the list. When you think of Pokémon, you usually think of battles, gyms, trainers, all that. But this show goes in the complete opposite direction. Instead of focusing on combat, it takes place at a peaceful resort where Pokémon come to relax. You follow Haru, the main character, as she starts working there and slowly learns how to deal with different Pokémon personalities. And the whole thing is done in stop motion, which makes it feel completely different from anything else in the franchise. What makes it work is how calm it is. There's no pressure, no big stakes. It's just small moments, interactions, and character growth. It almost feels like a break from the usual Pokémon formula. And even though it's so different from the games, it still captures that core idea of Pokémon, the connection between people and Pokémon, just in a much more relaxed, grounded way. At number 5, we've got The Witcher, Nightmare of the Wolf. And this one is interesting because it kinda sits between different worlds. Technically, The Witcher started as a book series, but let's be honest, most people today know it because of the games. That's what really pushed it into mainstream popularity, and this anime leans into that version of the world. Instead of focusing on Geralt, the story follows Vesemir when he was younger, long before he became the mentor figure we know, and you get to see a much more reckless, almost carefree version of a Witcher, before everything got darker. The movie dives deeper into how Witchers were viewed, how they operated, and the kind of world they had to survive in. And compared to the live-action series, this one feels a lot more intense. Faster fights, bigger monsters, and a darker tone overall. It doesn't try to retell the games directly, but it absolutely captures that same atmosphere, that mix of brutal combat, moral gray areas, and a world that never really gives you a clean answer. At number 4, we've got Devil May Cry, and this one has actually been evolving for a while now. The franchise already had an anime adaptation years ago, but Netflix is taking a completely new approach with this version, led by Adi Shankar, the same producer behind Castlevania. So instead of just revisiting the old story, this feels more like a full reimagining built for modern audiences. From what we've seen so far, it leans heavily into what made the game stand out in the first place. Not just the action, but the style behind it. Dante isn't just fighting demons, he's showing off while doing it. And that over-the-top, almost theatrical combat is something anime can actually push even further. What makes this adaptation interesting is that it doesn't try to simplify the identity of the games. It keeps that mix of chaos, attitude, and fast-paced combat, while building a more structured narrative around it. So, unlike older adaptations, this one feels like it understands exactly what Devil May Cry is supposed to be, and just amplifies it. At number 3, we've got Cyberpunk Edgerunners. Instead of retelling the story of Cyberpunk 2077, the anime takes place in the same world, but follows a completely new character. It centers on David, a street kid in Night City who loses everything and ends up joining a group of mercenaries known as Edgerunners. From there, he gets pulled deeper into a life of cybernetic upgrades, high-risk jobs, and a world that slowly starts to consume him. You're not watching a recap of the game. You're experiencing another side of it. You see how people actually live in Night City, how brutal it is, and how easy it is to lose yourself trying to survive there. The pacing is fast, the action is intense, but what really stands out is how emotional it gets. You actually feel the consequences of everything happening, which makes the world feel way more real than just a setting. And honestly, by the time it's over, it hits a lot harder than you expect. At number 2, we've got Castlevania, including Nocturne. And this is easily one of the most complete adaptations on this list. The original Castlevania series follows Trevor Belmont, the last surviving member of a disgraced monster hunting family. as he teams up with Sypha, a powerful mage, and Alucard, Dracula's own son. Together, they're trying to stop Dracula, who has declared war on humanity after the execution of his wife. And the story doesn't just stay focused on the main trio. It expands into politics, religion, and the collapse of entire regions under Dracula's influence. Then Nocturne takes that foundation and moves the story forward, focusing on Richter Belmont, a descendant of Trevor during the time of the French Revolution. This time, the conflict grows even bigger, tying vampire power into real historical chaos and showing how the Belmont legacy continues in a completely different era. What makes both series work is how they take the basic premise of the games, vampire hunters versus Dracula, and turn it into something much deeper. The games give you the setup, but the anime builds a full narrative around it, with characters that actually evolve and conflicts that feel much more grounded. And at this point, it's not just a good game adaptation, it's just a great series on its own. And at number 1, we've got Arcane. Set in the world of League of Legends, the story focuses on the divided cities of Piltover and Zaun. And at the center of it are two sisters, Vi and Jinx, who end up on opposite sides of that conflict. What starts as a personal story between them slowly expands into something much bigger, involving politics, technology, and power struggles that affect the entire world around them. At the same time, you're introduced to characters like Jace and Victor, whose work with a powerful new technology begins to change everything, creating opportunities for progress, but also opening the door to serious consequences. And that's really what makes Arcane stand out. The game itself doesn't tell a single linear story. It's built around champions and lore. But the anime takes those elements and turns them into a fully connected narrative where every character feels important. The animation, the pacing, the character development, everything comes together in a way that feels way beyond what you'd expect from a game adaptation. And by the end of it, it doesn't just feel like a great adaptation, it feels like one of the best animated series. So yeah, safe to say video game anime has come a long way. And honestly, this is just part 1. There are still a lot more adaptations out there worth talking about. Part 2 is coming very soon, and if you enjoyed the video, you can also check out our website. We've got some really cool t-shirts over there. Use the code NEW15 for 15% off. I'll see you in the next one.